Greetings, bloggers, vloggers, followers, and potters. Dustin here from Dustin's Dynasty with another edition of this week's vlog. So I did put a poll out on my Facebook page this week asking what you would like me to talk about. There were some options about different based on some of the blog posts that I wrote this week. So one of those that got the one vote with the most votes was anger and frustration in my experience with that. Well, we know that for me personally, anger and frustration, well, it necessarily does not connect with the sensory meltdown, but it very well may be when we become we can become frustrated, we become dysregulated, we become angry with ourselves. And I found this nice little graphic on Facebook that really explains how things can be overwhelming. And, that was pretty much a lot of time the nucleus behind what my meltdowns from being overloaded or that I was angry or frustrated. We all know that behavior is communication in the autism world, but sometimes it was not getting what I want. But a lot of time, there were times it was too much for me, and sometimes I didn't feel comfortable in a situation. That being said, so that was what the number one thing was. It was an unfamiliar environment, and I'd be unfamiliar, or I would feel uncomfortable in a situation, and it would be very hard for me to accept something that was very uneasy for me, or may have trauma or something. So I would get angry and I would get frustrated. A lot about my anger and frustration, 90% of it, and I mean, I did some towards others, but as I became of age until I was about, I'd say almost 25, 26, a lot of that frustration was taken out on my parents and my family. And they didn't deserve that. And even almost a decade and a half later, I realized I don't deserve that. Sometimes we get dysregulated, and it's oftentimes with the ones we love. I remember one time, my mother got pulled over for speeding, for going through a red light, and many years ago, and I was physically aggressive with her because I was dysregulated and it was unfamiliar, it was uncomfortable, and I was worried. And you don't realize the whole consequence within that situation. By the grace of God, we other than the ticket, we did get out of that situation. But it still brings memories, it still brings trauma, and that was something I never would ever want to take on her or anyone. I was very physically aggressive towards my mother a lot of times. It's very physically angry and upset with her and just my family. I was very upset, and I didn't really understand where I belonged in this world. It was a very hard time. Even as early as last April, I still didn't know where I belonged in this world. And, I have to say now that I do know, and I feel a lot more easier when things work themselves out. They do seem to be easier, and I really haven't had any physical aggression probably in like 13, 14 years. And again, that was at my parents. But I mean, there was different moments, even during COVID. I think I had some little bouts of it. But I think the reality is I know that that is not okay in any environment. And sometimes now as an autistic adult, when I'm angry at someone or something, I become verbally aggressive, and if I know I cannot be verbally aggressive, then I mask it, and it is taken out in different ways. I know I need to find healthier ways to channel my anger and my frustration. It's not always good. I mean, I do go to the gym, and that's this year, and that has helped to a great degree. But it's still sometimes, we don't understand where we lie within that realm. Um, it's very challenging to when you think, what could be the anger and the frustration is often because one autistic person is dysregulated, and because they're not able to regulate themselves properly, or they don't have enough sensory breaks, or enough time to transition from one thing to the next. I know for one, I am one who struggles with transitioning from one routine to the next. It's very challenging for me to do so, and it can be challenging. But I don't let it override me, and I don't let it overget to me too much. Sometimes we have to learn, that we have to work ourselves and accept ourselves as our autistic human beings, and just do as we need to do sometimes. And even if the rest of the world doesn't understand, it has to be understood in our way. I think, I was very angry. I'm very angry with a lot of things. Now, the next one that is on this is changes in routine. And I have to say, I've been going through all kind of changes. It seems like the last month of 2023 and into 2024. And one of those big things is how I get around and on my own. And while it is enjoyable, I'm still learning. It keeps moving from one thing to another, and it can seem a lot, but ironically, I got through it pretty well. The upcoming change that's going to happen in a few months. So I think you just have to learn how to process it. And sometimes when we don't get things that you want, I think with me personally, with changes in routine, when they're brought on a sudden, and sometimes there's time. I mean, no, it's not so much now in my late 30s, but as that teenager with a mix of pubescence and adulthood, if something was changed, if there was a sudden change in routine, I would be completely angry and aggressive, and be frustrated with that, and I would be in that meltdown. I'd be upset. I'd be angry at them. I'd take it out on people. Sometimes you're just overstimulated, and that's our next one. But sometimes you just have too many changes, and you're not getting your need to comfort yourself. And there's a lot of instances I'm thinking about as I'm making this video, that I can see where I should have had more sensory breaks, or things, that I should have done better for myself. But that was 20, 25 years ago. And unfortunately, you can't go back and change the past. You can only move forward. So that's what I plan to do with myself. And it can be challenging, and it can be very hard to understand. But once people get the gist of it, and now there's a lot of education in the autism world, so you don't have all that, that we didn't know back then, and why things were, and how things were, and why was I angry? Why was I upset? Why? But we know it's communication. But back then we didn't know that was my way of communicating or saying something. I didn't have I wouldn't say I've always been speaking. I've always been able to speak since probably the age of 3 or 4. But I think I was ashamed to admit that I was struggling, or I didn't want to cause frustration within the family or with my parents. And my parents didn't always understand either, that sometimes the littlest things were just too much for me. And that was when things were overstimulated, or that there was one more change that just threw everything off and caused that meltdown to go into the abyss of anger and frustration and aggression and verbal aggression and physical aggression, all of those things. And it's just, sometimes it's that. Now, also it's, excessive demands. I think sometimes, along with the overstimulation, when things become too much, it's the excessive demands. You're constantly told to do this and do that and do everything. And my father, he's a loving father, but growing up, he realized eventually, not to give me too many tasks at one time. He would tell me three things, and I could never follow the three things. And then when it became too much, and then when it was constant, and it was nothing against him in any way. It was, I think I just didn't really enjoy what I had to do when I lived with my parents. It was not that they were bad people. They're great people. And I never ever want to discount that in any way. Um, the fact is that sometimes what they asked me to do was too much, and it was too hard. It wasn't that I was lazy. Sometimes can be seen as lazy, but sometimes it's excessive demands and it's things we don't want to hear, or it's overstimulating, or it's unexpected, or it's unpredictable. And those things can cause you to be angry and upset. And I've said a million horrible things in my life to both my parents that I wish I never had said. And we've taken time over the past 3 years to nearly 4 years to heal those wounds and learn to live better. Even when I was in a meltdown a few years, not a meltdown, but a breakdown a few months ago, they did everything for me, and I can never thank them enough for that. And sometimes I would never, now being of a clearer mind and more of a sound mind, I would never take out that anger and that frustration in that way. Sometimes you have to not realize too that even though you want to be angry and you want to be irritable, and sometimes there has to be a boundary when you can take it out and when you can't take it out. Sometimes you're just overstimulated, you're dysregulated, and you're having changes to routine, and when someone is unexpected or unpredictable, and you get verbally aggressive, or at someone, and they react at you in a negative way, it just shocks you even more. And I think that was the beginning of the catalyst to what made me see that, I have to change my ways. But it took some time for me to get to that. And really, really, it really had to be a lot about, you know, um, food and diet, really. It had to be about, getting rid of the caffeine in my system. Now, some people say it could be one thing or it could be another. But for me, I cannot have caffeine. It's just a reality in life. It's too much for me, and it really amps up my body, and I just can't. It really dysregulates me, and it expedites the dysregulation, where I can be further angered or further upset by things like unfamiliar environment, changes to routine, and I can be overstimulated instantly with caffeine. I have not had it in nearly 4.5 months. And just things, that just too much. And I think that's the reality of just anything with a meltdown, or where that behavior, behavior begins, is the fact that sometimes it's just we're just overstimulated, and we're demanded excessively, or we're given questions excessively, or we're having to go to multiple transitions within a period of time. I think it's all those things that we just can't. And granted, I'm doing much better for myself, and I'm adulting quite well, given the circumstances of the last few months, last month or so. But sometimes it's not always been that way. And if I had learned half the things that I had learned, 25 years ago when I was diagnosed, I think I would have come out better about it. But the world didn't know, unfortunately. Um, it was all new, even though autism had been around for decades. Nobody really broke into the research, or really broke into how things are helped. It was about fixing the problem, always fixing, and always how can we avoid meltdowns, and anger and aggression and all of those things. But it was just putting a band-aid on it. It wasn't really addressing what was going on with us. Now, and then granted, there might have been some points where in therapy I might have tackled it, but I was really reluctant, and really didn't take the advice to heart, and really didn't understand what I needed to do to get myself back into rhythm. Now, in 2023, as we've become I've expanded my platform. 2024, actually, if I've expanded my platform, and we've become out with we learn more from other people on internet. Now, granted, I know you can't believe everything, but there's pretty valid sources out there that tell you what causes what and how to help yourself. Now, granted, you can't listen to everything, because sometimes we, as autistic people, if we are on our own and we're independently thinking, we'll take things at face value. And unfortunately, that's just one of those traits. And sometimes you have to see what works for you to understand what does really work for you. But I think one thing I had to realize was I can't be verbally aggressive. I've been a long time and never hit anybody or never been verbally aggressive in a long time at anybody else but my parents. And then now I realize I can't be physically aggressive towards anyone, and I really can't try not to be verbally aggressive towards I can't, I mean, other one that it doesn't feel comfortable, nor does my family need to have that in any passive aggressive kind of way. It's not healthy. It's not, the way I need to see it. Sometimes I need to see life how I need to see it and not have that frustration and upset. Part of that is also for me to work at getting out of that anger and out of that frustration, besides finding a way to it, is having that healthy routine that I know I can depend on in my own time. And that also takes a part of being flexible. And it's been a very long time of being flexible. But, other than sometimes I'm more flexible with things than I used to be for decades. It's not always been that easy, but, and sometimes it does get hard. But I think I channel it out later on with music or, going on the treadmill or something, that helps with the regulation in my very own way. I'm finding out what those pieces are little by little, bit by bit, and we're hoping that we're planning for the best. And I think 2024 is going to be a good year where we're going to shine and, not have that passive aggressiveness or that verbal aggression anymore. I don't want that anymore in my life. I don't need it anymore in my life. I'm just done with it. And I think just telling my story about my anger and just I see like I'm starting to see little by little all the damage that I mean, all the, not so much the damage, but all the reacting and how that reacting sets things back and how people see me. And I'm starting to see that I'm more of a value to people, not only through this vlog, but through the writing and through just everything that I do, not only on Dustin's Dynasty, but on many other things, my work, my groups, my church, everything. I think it's all working within itself. And just seeing that, how that blends in and all works in together and makes it what it is. It's not always easy to figure out what works for you, but you have to give things trial and error. You also have to give things a chance to make it a habit and stick. We're talking New Year, New resolutions. I was reading from a local person who is an esteemed colleague in the human services field in our community, and they said it takes 90 days to make a habit. So if you've been dysregulated or you've been, working on this stuff for a long time, you're going to have to realize that sometimes while things can be miracles, it's going to take about 3 to 4 months for something to actually kick into a habit and continue to be that way and not get into that aggression and that anger and that physical aggression and that passive aggressiveness. Sometimes you have to learn how to work and understand yourself as a human being, whether that is your kid or whether that is, if you yourself are just coming to learn that you're being autistic. It's definitely something, that is the everyday battle. And sometimes frustration and anger comes every day. And sometimes it's how you handle it and whether it's really validated to really be voiced or to a safe person or someone or a support system. But I think sometimes you have to learn what's valid and what's not too, because you just can't, there's just things that are just not gonna change and you have to accept them for what they are. But working through them and being calm, cool, and collected and be cordial about it, I think that would go a long way in making sure that you're not being angry and you're not. I mean, there's a difference between verbally angry and just lashing out and just being dysregulated and just being in a way, any kind of anger outburst or just you know, I think sometimes in 2024, I realize that I don't want to be that person anymore. I've learned my lesson from what I've done over the years. I'm just tired of it. I think I want to move on to brighter and better and learn how to regulate myself so that I don't get angry and I don't get frustrated with things. Yes, there's going to be frustration, but it's how you handle it and it's how you channel it. It's how you work with it. So, I just think that's just some of my thoughts on anger and frustration. And I want to thank whoever voted for that this week because I think sometimes we have to talk about it. We talk about a lot of times the good things in being autistic and the skills and the traits, but we don't talk a lot, and I don't talk a lot about what the barriers are in life. And sometimes being dysregulated, being aggressive in any form, or being anger, or just taking on emotions or causing meltdowns, or just acting the way you do, it's not going to work. It's not going to give you prospects for getting out in the world or seeing a difference in the world that you're in. You're never going to see the promise. And I think for me, I'm starting to see the promise of what the future lies within. But I know that and that within that same token, I have to be mindful of my mental health and my overall wellness in that prospect. So, I just think it's what it is. So, with that being said, I want to thank you for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe to this video. I appreciate all the liking and the sharing and all that. I've been looking at the analytics and the comments, so I've been going through them as they come in. But if I've responded to your comments in the last few years, last week, I've been going through them and clearing them out so I can see what you guys are writing. Always follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X, which is Twitter, and Pinterest. That handles Dustin's Dynasty. I'm on the web. That website is www.dustinsdynastyusa.com. And I have a link tree. That handle is Dustin's Dynasty. Again, I want to thank you for watching. If you're in a colder climate, please stay warm this weekend. Be safe. Charge up those devices. Have a good weekend. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.